UFC 313 is finally going down this Saturday. Great main event, great co-main, some fun fights throughout the rest of the card. But I'm going to be going through my full card predictions, main card, and the prelims. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around to certain matchups. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But let's just dive right into the prelim opener here. And this fight was actually just recently announced. It is Chris Gutierrez taking on John Castaneda. And both these guys were supposed to fight, within the last few weeks here. Both had opponent cancellations, guys pulling out. So Gutierrez was supposed to take on John Matsumoto, who ended up, stepping in to take on Rob Font in the Seattle card. And then Castaneda was supposed to fight last weekend against Douglas Silva de Andrade. De Silva ended up having some health issues, had to pull out the day before, think like during the weight cut. So now we get Gutierrez taking on Castaneda. Do believe this is taking place at featherweight, so neither guy's going to have to make that weight cut. Good news, especially for Castaneda, who I think was cutting down to a catch weight at 140 last week, before that one got canceled. So for Chris Gutierrez here, he has really only struggled with top competition. His only losses in the last 6 years are to Song Yadong and Pedro Munoz, so really no shame in losing to either of those guys. He's someone who wants to stay on the outside, has great footwork, able to kind of circle the cage. He wants to land his jab, land his kicks, really nice leg kicks, can also mix it up to the body and to the head. Overall, I'd say he just fights very safe. He's not going to come in reckless. He's not going to put himself in bad spots. Sometimes that can be kind of frustrating to watch, but it's his style. That's what he's going to do. He's going to pick you apart from the outside, try to win a decision, especially as of late. He has some solid finishes earlier on in his UFC run, but some of his more recent fights, definitely fighting a little bit passive. I will say wrestling defense has been a concern in his last couple of fights. In his most recent one against Kwang Lee, he was taken down twice, held down for 4 minutes. And then against Song Yadong in that main event, he was taken down twice, held down for 11 minutes. That was a main event, so 25 minutes, not like it was, over 2 rounds out of 3, but still not ideal. And Song Yadong isn't really someone who's known to be like a dominant control grappler. Now, on the other side of this matchup, John Castaneda, he is coming off a decision loss to Daniel Marcos. Really no shame in that loss. Marcos is undefeated, putting together a really solid UFC resume, but he had won his previous 2. He's well-rounded, 21 wins, 7 knockouts, 7 submissions, 7 decision wins. In 3 of his last 4 wins, he has landed a knockdown. He has also landed at least 3 takedowns in back-to-back fights. So typically, he is at his best when he's mixing it up, pushing the pace, getting his wrestling going. I think this is going to be a competitive fight. I just think Gutierrez is going to be the slightly cleaner guy on the feet. I think he's kind of going to frustrate Castaneda with his footwork, his movement. I think he's going to avoid getting held down for long periods of time. And I think he's going to win a decision. So I'm going Chris Gutierrez by decision, but I do think it's going to be competitive. Would not be shocked if this was a very, very close fight. Now moving over to a middleweight matchup, we have Ozzy Diaz taking on Djorden Santos. Ozzy Diaz is pretty much the definition of kill or be killed. He is 9-3 as a pro. All 9 of his wins are by finish, 7 knockouts, 2 submissions, and then his 3 losses are all by knockout. So he's going out there, he's going to get in a slugfest, and he's either going to put you out, finish you, or he is going to get finished himself. We have seen him get knocked out by Joe Pyfer on the Contender Series, and then by Min Yang Zhang in his UFC debut. He's moving down to middleweight for this matchup, debuted at 205, but has fought at middleweight before. But he has a pretty huge frame for the middleweight division. He's 6'4" with a 79-inch reach. Now, he's not someone who's coming in with that frame with like a ton of muscle, jacked. He was definitely looking pretty soft when he was up at 205. So I do think he'll be able to make the weight. Maybe somewhat concerning going back down to middleweight because he has been a little bit chinny throughout his career, but guess we'll wait and see. On the other side here with Santos, he is 10-1, but has really just faced some pretty weak competition throughout his career. He's fairly well-rounded, 3 knockouts, 4 submissions. Like, he's pretty much fine in every area, but he's not really exceptional in one specific spot. Like I said, I think Diaz is going to come in. I think this is going to be a sloppy fight. I think it's going to be a slugfest. He's chinny. I think Santos is just the slightly better guy here. I'm going to pick Santos by round 2 knockout. Even though he hasn't been a super prolific finisher, even against lesser competition, I just think Diaz is going to force a fight where one of these guys is going to go down, and I'm going to pick Santos to knock him out in the second. Now going down to featherweight, we have Mairon Santos taking on Francis Marshall. Santos is the tough winner from season 32, had a nasty left hook knockout in that championship fight. He's 14-1, a striker, 8 knockout wins, no submissions on his resume. I think Francis Marshall is fun. He's going to push a high pace, can be a high volume striker, but also is at his best when he's mixing in the wrestling, kind of blending those two. The last time I checked, Santos was like a -350 favorite, which seems insane. I am picking him to win. I think he's going to get it done in this matchup, but I don't think he should be greater than like a 3-1 favorite here. He has not faced the best competition. Francis Marshall isn't like, future champ caliber, but he's a solid UFC fighter. He's going to bring a tough fight. He's fairly durable. Like I said, he has good cardio. He's going to push a pace. I do just think Santos is the better guy in this matchup. I think he stays safer on the feet. He's less hittable. His takedown defense has been solid throughout his career. So I'm going to go with Mairon Santos by decision, but I do think the odds are a little bit crazy on this one. I will say, I do think we could potentially see a later round finish from Santos. If Marshall is really trying to push the wrestling game plan and Santos is just consistently stuffing those shots, I think we could see Marshall start to fade maybe, also take some reckless shots, and then I think that's where Santos could potentially find a finish, but my official pick is going to be by decision. At welterweight, we have Alex Morono taking on Carlos Leal. This is a pretty fun matchup here. Alex Morono isn't anything crazy, but he certainly makes the most of his physical tools. He's just not going to be some sort of top athlete, not overly explosive, not super powerful, and can kind of fade in fights, doesn't have the best cardio, but he's turned in a 13-8 UFC record, which for not being powerful, not being explosive, not having great cardio like I mentioned, that is a very impressive thing to do. You have to be pretty crafty, fight pretty smart to get to that sort of record. He has suffered back-to-back losses to Nico Price and Daniel Rodriguez, so not great, especially the Nico Price loss. He's someone who's definitely kind of past his prime. He's primarily a striker, but does have a really nice guillotine to kind of discourage the takedowns from his opponents. On the other side here with Leal, I think he's legit. He was absolutely robbed in his UFC debut. Came in, I think it was on short notice, to take on Rinat Fakhretdinov, who has a great record, has gone on a great run in the UFC, and it was a unanimous decision loss in Abu Dhabi. When you go to MMA decisions, all 16 media members who scored the fight, all of them scored it for Carlos Leal. Personally, I scored it 30-27 for him. Not something that's talked about as like a huge robbery, but it certainly was. And, obviously sucks given the circumstances because it was his UFC debut. Could have made a huge statement win there with someone who's probably like top 20 in the weight class. Didn't go his way, but he's fought great competition outside the UFC. He was in PFL, has some quality wins there, even some of his losses, right? He's facing some top guys. He hits hard, has good cardio. He's durable. He's an absolute dog. I think this is a mismatch here. I think Carlos Leal is going to go in. I think he's going to put the pressure on Morono. I think he's going to catch him early. I'm going Carlos Leal with a round 1 knockout. Now up one weight class at middleweight, we have Brunno Ferreira taking on Armen Petrosyan. This is pretty much like power versus technique here. Both these guys are strikers. I think both are going to want to keep it standing. Petrosyan is the far cleaner, more technical guy. Ferreira is just significantly more dangerous. He is kill or be killed. He has 12 wins, 9 are by knockout, 3 are by submission. 10 of those 12 finishes are in the first round. In his 2 losses, he has been knocked out and he has been submitted. So he has never seen the scorecards in his pro career. On the other side with Petrosyan, he's had some mixed results in the UFC, 3-3 in the promotion. But when you look at his losses, he is going up against very, very tough competition. His UFC debut, I believe, was against Kyle Bohalio. That's a very tough debut. Maybe it was his second fight. Then he lost to Rodolfo Vieira, who has, insane grappling for the middleweight weight class. And then his most recent loss to Shara Magomedov, that was the infamous double spinning back fist KO. I mean, that's tough. It was a competitive fight before that, but obviously got put away there. So 3 pretty tough opponents in his losses. My issue here with Petrosyan is that he has just not shown a lot of finishing upside, and I think it's tough in these matchups where you have someone who is just, a bona fide finisher going up against someone who hasn't had much success there. It really kind of limits the ways you can win a matchup. So he has 0 finishes, 0 knockdowns in his 6 UFC fights. That's not ideal. It seems like the 2 most likely outcomes here are a Ferreira knockout or a Petrosyan decision. Maybe it's possible Petrosyan finds a finish. It's not like he was immune to finishes, pre-UFC. Maybe Ferreira kind of overextends himself, gets reckless. I could see Petrosyan finding a finish, but it does kind of seem like Ferreira by knockout or Petrosyan by decision. This is tough for me. I'm going to slightly favor Petrosyan. I think he can stay at range, use his kicks, stay safe on his feet. I don't, feel 100% confident if Ferreira knocked him out. I wouldn't be shocked, but my pick is going to be Petrosyan by decision, potentially a sketchy decision. And then going down to flyweight, this is a really fun matchup here. Rei Tsuruya going up against Joshua Van. This is just young prospect taking on young prospect. I feel like ideally these guys wouldn't have had to fight each other. I do think Tsuruya is stepping in here on somewhat short notice. Tsuruya is 22 years old. Joshua Van is only 23. These are guys who are going to be ranked in the weight class for a very, very long time. And it's also pretty much a pure grappler versus striker matchup. Tsuruya being the grappler, Van being the striker. Tsuruya is 10-0 as a pro, 4 knockouts, 4 submissions. He has 3 road to the UFC wins and then 1 win actually in the UFC. 2 of those on the road to the UFC were a Kimura finish and then a ground and pound finish, which was just, nasty. If you guys want to watch that, he finished it like right at the end of the first round, but had his opponent in just some brutal positions. And then his 2 decisions, he had 9 minutes of control time and then 6 minutes of control time. So he has been very, very effective with his grappling. On the other side here with Van, he is 5-1 in the UFC. Crazy impressive at only 23 years old and like getting himself into ranked competition. He fights at a very, very high pace. He is averaging 8.88 significant strikes landed per minute. Like once you're getting above 5, that's a pretty high pace, a solid number. He's almost at 9 significant strikes per minute. In his 4 decision wins, he has landed at least 118 significant strikes. Not someone who's known for being a grappler, not going to be shooting takedowns in this matchup, but he has been pretty solid defending takedowns, has an 80% takedown defense. He's also someone who's not content to stay on his back. So if he does get taken down, maybe you're holding him down for 30 seconds, a minute at a time. But, historically throughout his UFC career, he is not someone who, when he gets taken down, is just like a fish out of water on his back and getting held there for the entire round. In this matchup, I do just think Van has the more high-level experience. He certainly has the better wins on his resume. I trust his cardio. What happens if Rei Tsuruya, maybe has a little bit of success early on with the wrestling, but then Van is stuffing his shots, keeping it on the feet? I think we could see Tsuruya start to fade, and then you see Joshua Van just really start to build. So I'm going to go with Joshua Van by decision here. Would not be shocked if we see this fight again in like 4, 5, 6 years from now. Like I said, I think both these guys are going to be relevant for a pretty long time. And then I believe this is the final fight on the prelims at heavyweight. Just weird matchmaking here. We have Curtis Blaydes taking on Rizvan Kuniev. This is not something that, has occurred, I think, anytime recently. But in Curtis Blaydes' last fight, he was fighting for the interim title against Tom Aspinall. In Rizvan Kuniev's last fight, he was fighting on the Contender Series. So you have someone making their UFC debut going up against someone who was just fighting for a title. And it's not even really like Kuniev is some sort of like highly touted prospect. It's not like a Yuri Prochazka coming in, someone who's had like insane success in another weight class or or another organization or like a Michael Chandler type. That's what makes this whole situation so weird. What's also strange is that Kuniev, prior to fighting on the Contender Series, his fight directly before that was in the PFL, and he popped for steroids and got suspended. So it's not even like this dude's a huge star. It's odd to me, but whatever, the fight's booked. We're probably going to be getting it this weekend. Curtis Blaydes is legit. He's 13-5 in the UFC. He has quality wins over Jailton Almeida, Volkov, Overeem, Hunt, JDS. He hits hard and then is, one of the best, if not the best heavyweight wrestler, probably only behind John Jones at this point. His kryptonite in his career has just straight up been power punchers. His 5 losses, 2 of them have been to Francis Ngannou. Obviously hits like a tank. Tom Aspinall hits like a tank. Sergey Pavlovich hits like a tank. And then Derek Lewis is probably the worst one of those. But, obviously Derek Lewis has hammers in his fists, right? And landed just a brutal uppercut against Curtis Blaydes when he was shooting. I just don't think Kuniev is that guy. Not saying he doesn't have power on the feet, but he's not like the same explosive one-punch KO guys like the other ones who I just mentioned. He's more of a grinder, can keep it standing, but can also wear guys down with his wrestling. I just think this is too much of a step up in competition. You're going from, fighting guys in the PFL or, on the Contender Series, now fighting someone who just came off a title shot. Like I said, I think it's going to be too much too soon. I'm going with Curtis Blaydes, round 2 knockout. I also would just like to see Curtis Blaydes get this one done. He's a good dude. had some tough luck like right before he's getting that big fight or even in the big fight against Tom Aspinall. Would certainly hope he can fend off someone who just came in from the Contender Series, especially someone who had just been suspended, before getting that Contender Series shot. And now we are at the main event here, and we're going to start off with a very fun matchup here at lightweight between Bobby King Green and Mauricio Ruffy. I just think this is a really, really tough matchup for Bobby Green. This definitely seems like the Mauricio Ruffy, like Fighting Nerds showcase opportunity here. Bobby Green's a super unique striker, has pretty good vision, fights with his hands down, pushes a pace on the feet, has good cardio. Throughout his career, he has kind of struggled with some of the more like powerful big punchers. KO losses to Dustin Poirier, Drew Dober, Jalin Turner was his like most recent like big knockout loss. And he's not really known for having that big power, like the finishing upside. And then he actually early in his UFC career wrestled a fair bit, has just not gone to the wrestling in really any of his fights in the last 4 years. On the other side here with Ruffy, part of that Fighting Nerds gym that's just taken the UFC by storm. He is certainly, considered a top prospect. 11-1 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC. In those 11 wins, 10 of those are knockouts, 1 decision win. He is unique, fluid, has creative striking, hits really hard, and also manages range well. A lot of people compare him to like a younger Conor McGregor, the way he strikes. I just have a tough time seeing Bobby Green land consistently. Like when we see Green having success, he's constantly being able to land, pushing that pace like I mentioned. And the way that Mauricio Ruffy kind of manages range, I don't see that happening. Also, the hands down really scares me in this matchup because Ruffy is very unpredictable. He throws things from weird angles. He throws, combos, strikes, elbows, kicks that you're not really expecting. And with the hands being down for Green, I don't think that's going to bode well. I think the best case scenario here for Green is that Ruffy kind of showed in his last fight, if he's not getting the early finish, he can kind of slow down. So I think an interesting comp for a fight of like something that could go well for Bobby Green is the Rafael Fiziev fight, where Fiziev had a lot of success early on in that matchup, but then Bobby Green clearly came alive in the later rounds and won the third. Lost a decision, but had a good showing towards the end. Unfortunately for Bobby Green, I don't think it's getting there. I think Ruffy's going to finish him in the first. I think he is a legit prospect. I think, this sets him up to get a shot at the rankings. So I'm going Mauricio Ruffy, round 1 knockout. Continuing on with the main card, we have Amanda Lemos taking on Iasmin Lucindo at strawweight. This is a pretty solid step up in competition here for Lucindo, probably putting herself like 1 fight away from a title opportunity. She's currently on a 4-fight win streak after losing her UFC debut. Her last fight was a split decision win against Marina Rodriguez. She does a really solid job mixing it up. She's definitely capable on the feet, but mixes in the wrestling, at least 2 takedowns in her last 3 fights. Lemos on the other side has really kind of struggled in the grappling department. She was submitted by Virna Jandiroba in her last fight. In the title fight against Zhang Weili, Weili landed 6 takedowns, racked up 16 minutes of control time, and then she wasn't taken down by Jessica Andrade, but she was submitted with a standing arm triangle. She is very dangerous on the feet, though. She has 6 knockdowns in the UFC. She has power that you're just not typically seeing in the women's strawweight weight class. And then she also is a submission threat. I think she only has like 3 sub wins on her resume, but she is certainly dangerous on the ground, even if she is getting controlled and maybe doesn't have the best defense herself. My concern here with Lucindo is she really didn't dominate with her wrestling in the way I would have liked to see against Marina Rodriguez. That has been like a massive hole for Marina Rodriguez. She gets taken down. She gets held down. Her grappling is not great. And Lucindo, right, it was a close fight. She did have some success with her wrestling, but she wasn't able to control her the way I thought she potentially could have heading into that matchup. And I do think Lemos is the better grappler. Not saying she's great, but I do think she's better than Marina Rodriguez. And she's also just way more dangerous on the feet, way more powerful, can really make Lucindo pay. So Amanda Lemos is the underdog right now. I think she gets this one done by decision. I also wouldn't be shocked if she found a finish here, but my pick is going to be by decision, going with the underdog. Then an absolute banger here at lightweight. Jalin Turner taking on Ignacio Bahamondes. These are 2 just ginormous lightweights. Both are 6'3" with a 76-inch reach. Kind of interesting matchmaking because neither one of these guys are really going to be able to take advantage of that size because normally, right, significant height and reach advantage. Now they're pretty much like just random 5'10" lightweights going at it against each other. Jalin Turner's, had some rough results as of late. He's lost 3 of his last 4. But really aside from the last fight, and even with the last fight, like he has been competitive in these matchups. It's not like he's getting blown out of the water. He lost back-to-back split decisions to Dan Hooker and Mateusz Gamrot. There are certainly arguments he won both of those. I think probably he has a better argument in the Gamrot fight just based on damage, right? It was pretty much like him stunning Gamrot into Gamrot, like scrambling to take him down and kind of just rack up control time. Not something that really should be rewarded with the scoring criteria. And his other loss was the ground and pound knockout by Renato Moicano. But even in that fight, right, he's still landing knockdowns or a knockdown. Bahamondes, having a lot of success as of late, coming off back-to-back round 1 KO wins. The concern here with Jalin Turner is he does kind of have a tendency to fade in fights. I think Bahamondes is much more fit for a dogfight. If this is going to be a war, go into, the second, third round. I think that does kind of favor Ignacio here. But also, in my opinion, Jalin Turner is just way more dangerous. He was on a 5-fight win streak before he got the Gamrot fight, and that was when he was kind of like gearing up to take on that ranked competition. He ran through his opposition. 5 straight finishes, 2 knockouts, 3 submission wins, and then even when he is getting to the top competition, he landed a knockdown in the Gamrot fight and stunned him at least another time. He hurt Dan Hooker bad with that head kick that Dan Hooker just like somehow ate because he's a psychopath, and then also landed a big knockdown in that Renato Moicano fight at UFC 300. So even some of the fights he's losing, it's against great competition, and they're still very, very competitive. So my questions here are, can Ignacio Bahamondes kind of push a pace without getting clipped early on? And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that as effectively as he normally can, given the fact that he's not going to have, a significant height and reach advantage where he can kind of stay on the outside and kind of pick Jalin Turner apart. I just prefer Jalin Turner's experience here. I think he's been bet into an underdog spot. He's been out for 11 months, which, could go either way. Either he's maybe going to have some ring rust, or he could have, developed, kind of refreshed himself and come back a better version. I think Jalin Turner finds a finish here. I'm going to go with round 2 knockout. I just keep thinking about the fact that Jalin Turner was just nuking dudes leading up to his opportunity to get into the rankings, and we just haven't seen Bahamondes have, really any opportunity to fight these higher level guys, and so we haven't seen him perform super well. So Jalin Turner round 2 knockout is going to be my pick. And then we are at the co-main event here. Not the fight that we were expecting, a lot of fans were hoping for. It was supposed to be Justin Gaethje taking on Dan Hooker, but we have Rafael Fiziev stepping up on 10 days notice, and a rematch of a really fun fight that took place, a couple years ago here between Gaethje and Fiziev. It is no longer a 5-round fight, now a 3-rounder with Fiziev stepping in, but this is just a very, very unique rematch because in the first fight, Gaethje was kind of like defending his spot, right? It was pretty much like his last stand. I think he even said that if he lost that fight, he probably would have retired. Fiziev was like the up-and-comer. This was his big test, potentially, getting a title shot after this or one fight away. And it was just a super close, very competitive fight. Fiziev started strong. Gaethje was the guy who ended well, ended up getting the decision. I do think it's a closer fight than people remember. Like, giving Rafael Fiziev 2 rounds would not have been crazy. I think one of the judges did give him 2 rounds and scored a 10-8 in the third, which is crazy because Fiziev stunned Gaethje pretty bad, like right at the start of that 3rd round. But overall point here, it was competitive, was certainly not a blowout for Gaethje, even though he did, end the fight well. But now both these guys are kind of coming off of tough situations where you have Gaethje off the vicious KO loss to Max Holloway, and then Fiziev hasn't fought since September of 2023, the fight after Gaethje, where he tore his ACL. So it's like, what form are we going to be getting out of either of these dudes? Is Gaethje going to be a little bit like gun shy? Is his durability going to be shot? Is Fiziev's movement going to be the same? Is he going to have a ton of ring rust? The way that I'm looking at it, I'm not quite as concerned about Fiziev because it seems like he's been looking for a fight for a while now. I know he kind of like maybe wasn't intending to call out the UFC, but pretty much said like he's been looking for a fight and like nothing's been coming his way, and he's been out for almost a year and a half. So this is not a situation where he's coming back and like really pushing it with his rehab. I think like the normal recovery for a torn ACL, it's like 9 to 12 months. So he has certainly taken enough time to feel good. And also the fact that he could take this on short notice and come in at 155 shows that he has been in fighting shape. He's been looking for an opportunity. He gets it here against Gaethje. I do have real concerns about Gaethje because he has always relied on his durability and like the dog, his heart in these matchups. He is consistently getting in these wars, and there's no guarantee that either of those are still going to be there. I still think he's going to go in there. Obviously, he's still going to have the heart, but you can see guys change the way they fight after they get put out viciously. I think the most recent example is Kamaru Usman, where he was comfortably winning the first fight against Leon. He gets knocked out. The second fight, he's just way more passive. He's way more tentative. That's not a great fit with Gaethje in terms of his style. And then also the durability. Fiziev hit him with some big shots in that first fight. Is he going to be able to still take those shots coming off that big knockout loss? We just don't know. So I think this is going to be a close fight. Still think it's going to be competitive. I think the durability is going to come back to bite Justin Gaethje. He has taken a lot of damage. For the first time really ever, he got his lights put out clean. I'm going to go with Rafael Fiziev, round 3 knockout. I think they go to war, and I think Fiziev ends up finding a finish. And then we have finally arrived at the main event, a super interesting matchup here between Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. I'd say I'm very excited, but also pretty nervous about this matchup here. As someone who, is a pretty decent fan of Alex Pereira, I think this is easily his worst matchup at light heavyweight, but I don't think it's quite as bad as people are, kind of thinking. I think some people think this is just like dominant Dagestan wrestler taking on Alex Pereira, who has like 0 grappling, 0 takedown defense, and I don't really think either of those things are true. Like Magomed Ankalaev is really good. I'm not, downplaying his skills, but he's just not the style that a lot of people think he is. He is unbeaten in his last 13. His only career loss was in his UFC debut. He is more of a striker than he is a wrestler. Now, not saying he's going to be more of a striker in this specific matchup, but throughout his UFC career, he has relied way more on his striking ability than his grappling. He is a clean, patient striker. He has 7 UFC knockdowns. He has only been knocked down once, so has a solid chin. Certainly can wrestle, but it has not been his go-to strategy. He is averaging under 1 takedown landed per 15 minutes and is at a 31% takedown accuracy. Now, Pereira is never going to be a good grappler. He is never going to be a plus grappler. It's just the nature of the fact that, he was a kickboxer for so long. He's coming into MMA kind of in his later years. He's never going to develop into someone who's going to be like turning to that offensively or even great at like defending those shots, but he has already proven to be very good at mitigating damage when he is taken down. He knows he has that fight-ending power at any point. He is not going to take an unnecessary risk to get back up to his feet or put himself in a bad position where someone can tee off on him on the ground. So he is very fine just chilling on the ground, kind of wrapping up his opponent and losing the round. We saw that against Izzy. We saw it in the Jan Blachowicz fight where he's just kind of chilling, not trying to take damage. And then also in, I think, the first Yuri fight where he got taken down in the first round. I think there are a lot of people out there that think Magomed Ankalaev is just going to run out and push like a super high volume wrestling pace. And he might do that, but that is also just not a style that he is used to putting out there. We kind of saw Jan Blachowicz do that, where typically, like, not saying Jan won't mix in the wrestling, but he's primarily a striker, especially what we had seen, heading into that Alex Pereira matchup. And he instantly went to the wrestling against Pereira, and he gassed himself out. Now, I will say it was an elevation, but it was also a 3-round fight, and he was exhausted after the 3rd round because it was not a style that, he was really comfortable going to. So I think the big question here for Ankalaev is, can he stay safe on the feet for long enough to kind of capitalize on his shots and rack up the control time? Because I don't think it's going to be a super effective route to victory if he just instantly runs at Pereira and tries to wrestle, because if Pereira survives, we know he has that knockout power that goes into the later rounds, and Magomed might be in a really, really tough spot. For Pereira, I think he can find success with the leg kicks. We saw Jan Blachowicz really beat up the legs of Magomed Ankalaev. Now, in the same matchup, we saw Magomed go to the wrestling in the later rounds, round 4, round 5, and have a lot of success. I go back and forth on this matchup. I think it's going to be very competitive. I think there are going to be times where, Alex Pereira fans are feeling very uncomfortable because Magomed's working in the clinch. Maybe he takes him down, kind of, landing some ground and pound, having some success. And then I think there are going to be times where Alex is on the feet, landing some big shots. I fully expect this to be a very competitive fight. I think we might be going into the championship rounds talking about, is it 2-1 Magomed? Is it 2-1 Alex? I think Alex Pereira is going to separate when we do get into those championship rounds. I think Magomed's going to be a little bit tired. I think he's going to be a little bit worn down from going to the grappling more. And Pereira might be tired also, but we know he carries that power into the later rounds. The round 4 finish against Khalil Roundtree, the round 5 knockout against Israel Adesanya, And I think as Magomed's defense maybe starts to fade a little bit, he's getting tired, kind of getting worn out. I think that's where Pereira finds the big shot and finds the knockout. So I'm going to go with a round 4 knockout from Alex Pereira. Overall, I think Pereira's wrestling defense is maybe a little bit better than people think. Not necessarily in terms of like not getting taken down, but in terms of just mitigating the damage, not getting, put out by ground and pound or getting submitted. And then I think Magomed Ankalaev's striking is getting slept on a little bit here. It's not like if they just stay at range and strike that like Pereira is just going to go out and nuke him, especially because Magomed does play things very safe. He's not typically going to overextend. But I think this could be a fight that like the margins are very, very thin where it's super, close on the feet. There's not a ton of volume being thrown out there because Magomed doesn't want to overextend. Alex Pereira doesn't want to overextend himself and get taken down. So I think we could see like Pereira kind of chipping away on the outside. Then maybe Magomed racks up like some clinch control time, lands a takedown, like lands some ground and pound. And we're looking at just these very, very close rounds. But when we're looking at someone who can really pull away, I think that's Alex Pereira. And I think it's with his power in the championship rounds. So that's my prediction, round 4 knockout. Would love to hear your thoughts on this card. Who do you think's winning the main event, the co-main event, the other matchups? Let me hear it down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.